So let's go ahead and add some meta tags to our page. So I'm going to go up underneath my Insert menu. I'm going to come down to HTML, Head Tags, and we'll start with keywords. When I add keywords to my page, I'm keeping in mind that they're for the search engine. Now, not all search engines see keywords the same, so I really need to make sure and go to that particular search engine that I'm going to target and find out how they prefer keywords and accessibility so I can make sure and use the search engine optimization best for that particular search engine. When I'm typing in my keywords, I want to keep in mind that I'm going to separate them with a comma. So if this is for that photography user group website, for instance, I would put in photography, and I'd put a comma, and maybe user group, and a comma, and any other keyword that might be of interest. I also want to keep in mind anything that might be misspelled and add that to my keyword selection also. And anything else that makes sense to go with your keywords. When I'm done, I'm just going to click OK. Now, before I say this, I want to make sure that my cursor is sitting in the right place. Now, I see that my cursor is sitting in my P tag in my code view. So I might want to copy this, and I'm going to do on the PC, so I'm going to do a Control C. Because what's going to happen when I click OK is that now that is going to be where my cursor happens to be sitting in my code view. Now, that's okay if it does, but this is a common mistake that we make when we're working in a split view, and then we'll just move it. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and I see that it is inside of my P tag. So I'm going to grab where this is sitting, the beginning part of that tag and the end part of that tag, and I am going to just move it after my title so that it's inside of the correct place. Normally, if you are just looking in the design view and I have my cursor sitting in the design view, that won't happen. So let's go ahead and make sure that we have, for our description, that we have our cursor sitting in our design view. And then I'm going to go back up to Insert, HTML, Head Tags, and this time we'll add a description. Your description, you don't want to be extremely long. You don't want to put several paragraphs of a description in. The information on your page will also be important, so we want to make sure our description is kind of short and to the point. So I might say something like, Kansas City's premier photography user group. This will actually be used in your search engine description. Now we see that's actually in the right place. It's inside of our head tags and our meta, name, description, content, etc. Now, had I not typed that in here, I could have already typed that myself. So we'll leave that for a minute. I'm going to click on my return key, making sure that I'm in my code view when I do so. So I'm going to put my first little open part of my tag here, and I'm going to start typing. Now you'll notice that you've already got code hints up. So if I start typing meta, it's going to go to that particular tag, and then I can just click enter or return. When I hit a space now, I get the other options up. So it's not going to give you any options that you don't have available for that particular tag. So this is called code hinting, and it's extremely helpful when typing your own HTML. So I type name, and now what comes next? Well, this is going to be a description. So if I start typing my D, it goes straight to my description. Notice that I also had available for my keywords if I wanted. So now what? Well, now I need to put the content of what that description is in there. So I start typing content, it understands that, and you'll notice that it now has my quote marks. So even if you're brand new to HTML and writing your own HTML, as long as you're using your code hints, you can see that it will go ahead and put in the quote marks for you so that you don't have to remember to do that yourself. And I'm just going to type description here for the moment because we don't want to have to type that all over again. Now these are self-closing tags. So then all I would have to do is put a / and end that particular tag, so it doesn't have to worry about using an actual close tag that goes with that meta name. So regardless of whether you insert your meta tags through your insert menu or you actually type them yourself, it will help both you and your search engine optimization. Again, making sure that you go and take a look at that actual search engine itself, Google, Yahoo, etc., whichever one that you're targeting, and look up what will be best for their particular needs. Since the page we're looking at doesn't have any CSS in it, it's a great way to actually take a look at our properties and a way to start CSS if we don't have any in there already. So let's make sure that we're in the actual design view of the page so that we can see our property inspector. At the very bottom of our property inspector is a button called Page Properties. Go ahead and click on it. And once it pops up, I have several different categories. I have Appearance CSS, I have Appearance HTML, I have a links, heading, title, and tracing image. So when we add things to our appearance in our CSS file here, we're going to make our own CSS embedded in the page itself. But let's take a look at some of the options that we have. So we can choose a page font from here. If I click on this, I see several different types of fonts available. Again, using the same sort of naming that we did before, meaning that I want to make sure and add what I would like first. If they don't have any of those, then I can choose either a serif or sans serif. Later we'll talk more about fonts and what's available for the web. For now, we're just going to choose, let's say, Verdana. Now I get to choose whether it's going to be bold or italic. Again, this is probably not the best place to just click a B or an I button. We can make those choices later. This is for the entire page. This is going to be our default for all of our pages. So next I want to choose a size. Notice that I have pixels over here to the side, but we're going to put 62.5. And then I'm going to choose, instead of pixels, points, inches, centimeters, millimeters, picas, m's, x's, I'm going to choose %. We can also define a text color. It's really just good practice to make sure that you're defining a text color as well. So again, this is going to be attached to our body tag. So at the moment, let's just choose a simple black. You'll notice that Dreamweaver automatically uses that 3-digit hexadecimal shorthand for black, so it uses 3 zeros instead of the 6, since it's a series of repeating numbers. Also notice that it has that pound sign in front of it. So that's going to show up here automatically in this color picker, but let's say you went to Photoshop's color picker and found a color that you wanted to use. You can copy that hexadecimal number and put it in your code. Just make sure that you put the pound sign in front of it, because Dreamweaver won't recognize that as a color unless that pound sign is there. Since this is a repeating number, it can also be a shorthand CSS by just 000. I'm going to go ahead and give it a background color. And at the moment, we do not have a background image for our file, so we won't be putting one in there. If I had one, I could also designate whether it's going to repeat, not repeat, repeat just to the left X, or repeat down from the page on the top Y. By default, you have a little bit of a buffer in your page. So I'm going to move my screen here just for a second so that you can see My paragraph doesn't go all the way to the top of the page, nor does it go all the way to the left of the page. Move this back up. So I can designate whether the body has a margin or not. Left margin, right margin, top, and bottom. I can make those changes. Let's go to our Appearance HTML. Now that we're on Appearance HTML, you'll notice that we have some of the same options that we had under Appearance CSS. So why are there two? This is what's called really legacy, and it's left over from older versions of Dreamweaver. Some people might actually be more comfortable with this, but if we're using CSS in our files, we don't necessarily want to choose this because it won't actually create CSS for us. So we're not going to choose anything here, and we're going to go down to our next category, which is our links, which shows the CSS in parentheses, so I know that it's going to make sure and add this to my CSS file. So I have a link font, a size for my links, link colors, etc. So when I start here, do I really want to change my font? Now, in my appearance category up above, I was able to choose a default font that is going to be attached to my body tag, which will be my font for everything. I don't necessarily need a separate font for my links as well, especially if they're going to be in my page, and I just want to make sure that when they click on them, they go somewhere or do something, so I don't necessarily need this to be anything different. Except you may want to choose a bold, for instance, if you want to have them stand out a little bit more on your page. It's really what your end user expects. Do you have an older audience? Do you have a newer, younger audience? That will be the determining factor in how you want your links presented. I'm not going to change the size here either because I've already changed the size for my appearance otherwise. But we can take a look at our link colors now. Now by default, we have our link colors as blue and our rollover colors as purple or something like that. I can never remember because I always come in here and change them myself. So when I choose a link color, you don't want it to be the same color as your page color. So let's say we choose a green for my link color. Now I've got three other choices. I really want to choose these all so that they are in my CSS so everything works nicely. When I choose them here, they will be in the correct order also in my CSS. My rollover links we'll choose next, and I'll choose a nice blue for that. So when you're looking at the page and you see a link, you're going to see the link color is green, and when the user rolls over with their cursor on that particular link, it is now going to show up as blue. But what if they come back to a page that they've already been at before? We also have visited links, and then we have active links. So my active link is like a rollover for my visited link. So once they've been to the page and I roll my cursor over that link that they've already been there, then I get my active link. It really depends on how you have your site set up, whether you want these to be different or not. A lot of times I just choose the exact same color for my visited links as my regular link color and choose the same color for my rollover and active links as well. But just so we can take a look at our page, we'll choose totally different colors for each thing. And maybe orange. Doesn't matter whether they're pretty or not at the moment. So now we have underline styles. How do we want our links presented? So do I want it to always underline, which would underline both on the link itself and for the rollover link? Do I want it to never underline? Do I want it to show underline only on rollover or hide underline or rollover? Again, this all goes back to who your audience is. Does your audience expect a link? Is your audience used to the internet, and when they see some text of a different color, they know that it's probably going to be a link, and when they roll their cursor over it, they see their hand, so they know for sure that that's going to be a link. You've got a change of color when they roll their cursor over it, so they already know that. So what I choose here will typically depend on who my audience is. And we'll just choose Show Underline Only on Rollover. Our heading category. So this is where I can make sure and put the heading sizes and colors for what I'm going to be using on my page. Now, headings themselves have to do with orders of importance. You want to make sure and use your headings so that search engines know what parts of your page are more important than others. For instance, I always want to use them in order as well. So if I have a main section at the top of my page, I want to designate it then with maybe a heading 1. Subheads with a heading 2. Anything that goes with a subhead in the same section of a subhead, then maybe a heading 3, 4, 5, or 6. Really just depending on how much that you actually need, but you want to use them in order on the page so that the search engines see them in order of importance. So for our heading 1, for instance, since we're using M's for our measurement, I'm going to say 2 M's, and we'll give this an actual color. Something other than black, just so that we can see what's what on our page. And I'm just going to choose a color. For my heading 2, I'm going to choose 1.6 EM and choose another color. For right now, that's the only ones that we'll choose, but normally I would go ahead and fill all of them out. Next is your title and encoding. Now this is the third place that you can change your title at. We've talked about being able to change your title at the top of your page, at the top of your window, in the code itself, and this is the third place that I can make sure and change the title so you don't end up with that untitled document. Here I can also change the document type. So for instance, if I were doing a page and I wanted to make sure that it was XHTML 1.0 strict, for instance, or 1.1, or maybe I was doing something strictly for mobile, or even HTML5, even though right at the moment we can have very limited access to what we're able to do with HTML5. I'm going to leave it at 1.0 transitional. Next is my encoding. I could change that if I needed it. The same thing with my Unicode. Again, just how I want my special characters designated on my page. I can also see my document folder and my site folder structure. And if you click on your tracing image is something that we used to use a fair amount of when we used absolutely positioned items inside of Dreamweaver. The problem with a tracing image, even though that we can add one, is that things aren't always pixel perfect in every browser. So while it's great in theory, it's not necessarily something that you'll use all that often. But what it is that I have a JPEG or a GIF, for instance, of the actual look and feel of the site that I have. I would add a tracing image in, back off on the transparency of it, so it's just kind of a ghosted back image. And then when I would build, basically think of it like a puzzle. When I'm putting the puzzle pieces back together for the site, I can try and line it up as much as possible with that tracing image. Again, great in theory, but not necessarily a practical use. Go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to scroll up on the code side of my page a little bit so I can see the beginning of my CSS. Now this is an embedded CSS style. So I see a tag that says style type equals, and in my quote marks, text/CSS. Then I also have an end tag for that, and I scroll down. Right above my end of my head tag, I see the end of my style tag. I'll scroll back up, so I see body, TD, and TH, where I added my font family, my size, and my color for my body tag. This will also change any table heading and table data, or my cell structure, to have the same properties as my body tag. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit, and let's talk about our links in here. So I see that I have my link, visited, hover, and active. If I choose all four of these, they need to be in this exact order. There's a little saying that we have in CSS that help us remember that order. It's a love-hate relationship. So the L in love for my link, the V in love for my visited, the H in hate for my hover, and the A in hate for my active. Love-hate relationship, because we want to make sure that they're in the right order or they won't be displayed properly. Now if I take a look at my page, my font has changed. Now I see that I have a header 1 that is designated in green. I have my subhead in 2. I didn't style my subhead 3 or my 4, so those are just the default. And I didn't change my list item yet either, so that should look exactly the same except for my font family being different. So next we'll take a look at actually putting text on our page. Dreamweaver CS5 has dramatically improved how to set up a website. So we will delve into site setup, adding meta tags, files, and folders, and why it's important to let Dreamweaver do that work for you. Let's get to work. So let's take a look at folder structure first. If I take a look at chapter 3 here on my desktop, just in my Finder, I'm going to open that up, and let's talk about a couple of concepts first before we take a look at our folder structure. If I have a smaller website, I may end up with all of my files in the same directory. But that's really the biggest concept here, is everything needs to be inside of a root folder. I don't ever want my images or any other files outside of my folder, because that's what's going to be uploaded to my remote server. If I have a larger website, I need to be a little more concerned with the structure of my files inside of my root folder. I want to be able to find things easily. So for instance, if my main menu has an about page, a contact page, a join, and a photo walk page, as we see here inside of my Finder in chapter 3, then those pages may also have subsections as well. So for instance, if I have an about page, and then I have maybe careers and CEO, staff, you name it, what might be inside of that about page, if I'm going to have multiple pages, I probably want to go ahead and have a folder with those things in them. If they have their own specific images, you could have your own images folder inside of those as well. I see a CSS folder here and an assets folder. Really depending on how complex that your site is going to be, I may end up with just a CSS folder, but personally, I like having an assets folder. And inside of my assets folder, I will have my CSS folder, I will have my Flash folder, images folder, and any JavaScript folder. Depending on how many clients that I might have, I could also have my original source files in here, and that way all of my files are then kept together in that particular client's root folder. So now let's take a look at Dreamweaver. We'll go ahead and open that back up again. And now we need to understand how to actually set up your site inside of Dreamweaver. Now once we set up our site, we're going to do everything from that particular panel. If I need to add files, if I need to add a folder or move things around, I want to do that inside of my files view so that Dreamweaver knows where things are at and it can help update my links for me. So over on the right hand side of my panel, I see my files panel. In my files panel, right now mine says desktop. I see my computer, I see my network, etc. So I can either click on this little button over here to the side that says Manage Sites, or this is also a drop-down menu. If I click on it and I move all the way to the bottom, it says Manage Sites. Go ahead and click on that. Once this dialog box pops up, I want to create a new site. So I'm going to go ahead and click on New. If you have used Dreamweaver CS4, you'll notice that this dialog box has changed quite a bit. It's much simpler than it was in CS4. This is where I can initially name my folder. So the site that we're going to be working with is a photography user group website. So I'm just going to call this user group. just to make it simple, what I name this here doesn't matter at all in the long run. It's just really for me to know what this particular site definition is for. I now need to show Dreamweaver where my root folder is. So if I click on this little button right here, and I can browse for that particular folder, I'm going to go to my desktop where my project files are. I'm going to go into my project files. I'm going to click once on Chapter 3, or on the Mac, I can click on Chapter 3 and say Choose. On the PC here, I can either say Open, or I can right-click and say Select. Then I can choose Select here, and now that will be my path. So my desktop and my project files. I'm going to go to my server setup here. If I click on a little plus sign here, I get to choose what type of server that I have. Is it connected by FTP, local network, RDS? So if I just choose FTP for a moment here, this is going to be our most common type of connection to our remote server. I would give it a server name, my FTP address. So depending on who is hosting your site, your FTP address may be different. It could be a number, it could be FTP dot whatever the site is. It could also just be www dot whatever the site name is .com. I will have a username, I will have a password. Again, that is given to you by the host, whoever is hosting your website. Root directory is the files that you're going to be working with inside of Dreamweaver. So for instance, I may have a much more complicated site in PHP, etc. I may not need to see all of those particular files that are associated with it. So my root directory may be a /, and whatever the file structure is, maybe www, where the actual HTML files are. Once I put in my FTP address, I will also have a web URL specified here. Why I need to do this, or why that should be put into this particular window, is so that Dreamweaver can help me later on in making sure that all of my links are set up and I can do a site-wide report on my root folder and all my files. If I click on More Options, I'm able to see, I'm going to move my window up just a little bit here. I'm able to see if I need to use a passive FTP, particular protocols. Do I need to use an alternative method? Most of the time you won't need to choose these, but if you do, your host should be able to help you with those. If I click on my Advanced tab up here, I can have more information about my remote server. Do I need to maintain synchronization information? What that is going to do for me is be able to synchronize date-wise my files on my local machine as opposed to the files on my remote server, and it will help me keep those up to date so I can make sure that the correct files are in both places. I can, if I would choose, automatically upload files on server on save. Personally, I don't like this checked just because I like a little more control and put the files over on the server when I am ready for those files to be on the server. Otherwise, on save, it's going to just automatically move that file over onto your remote server. You can also enable file check-in and check-out. Now let me click this just for a moment so we can talk about it. This is great if you're working with a team in multiple locations. So for instance, if I am in San Francisco and I have part of my team over on the East Coast, I put my checked out name, I put my email address in so that when I check out a file, somebody can open it and they can look at it and read it and they know that I particularly have it checked out, and then they know not to work on that particular file. It's a locked file, it's a read-only file, and nobody can overwrite it. If I have a local folder, let's say we're all in the same location and I'm using checked in and checked out, I can actually override. It doesn't lock me out of the file. I can open it up, but I at least know that somebody is working on the file at that particular time and I won't make any changes. I can set up my testing server from here. So for instance, I can set up a model for ASP.NET, Cold Fusion, PHP, JSP, etc. What this will do is, let's say I'm working with a Cold Fusion site. Cold Fusion is a way to work with a backend file. If I'm working with a site that needs some interactivity and a database, I am probably going to need to set up a testing server. So I would set up my testing server so I can actually see what those pages are doing in Dreamweaver. If I don't set up a testing server, I can't actually see what's going on with my files. I'll see that it is, let's say, a Cold Fusion file, and I'll see the elements that have Cold Fusion applied to them. The elements that don't have Cold Fusion applied to them, I actually will see in my window, but if I don't set up a testing server, I can't actually preview what those files are going to look like. We're going to go ahead and click on Cancel. We're not going to set up an FTP server at the moment. I also have version control. Version control is great. Dreamweaver uses Subversion, and it's been enhanced in CS5. I can click on Access and use Subversion. And again, we won't be setting this up at just the moment. We will after a while, but I can give my protocol, whether it's going to be HTTP, SVN, HTTPS, give it a server address, a repository path, username, and password, and I can test it. And this has, again, been enhanced for CS5. Since we won't be setting up Subversion right now, we're going to go back to our Access and say None for the moment, and go ahead and twirl down the arrow for your advanced settings. The first one is Local Info. So I can choose where my default images folder is going to be. Next, we'll look at Relative Links to. This is actually very important when working inside of Dreamweaver. Because you can accidentally move entire folders around, we want to make sure that your links are relative to your document and not to your site root. Your site root would then be your machine, where it's located at, what user, etc. And we don't want to accidentally move anything, and there are times when you need to move a folder. So that way our entire root folder can be moved to a different location. We can go back up to our normal site and tell Dreamweaver where that root folder is. But at least the files inside that we're working with are going to be relative to one another. So for instance, if I have my home page and my about page, if it's in the same directory, it's in the same root folder, the same file structure, then when I link to my about page from my home page, it's just going to be about.html or whatever your extension is. If it were relative to my site root, then it's going to be, again, your hard drive, what user you are, etc. And then things can be broken a whole lot easier. This is another place I can make sure I put my web URL, again, so that I can make sure that Dreamweaver can do my site reports, etc. I have a cloaking tab. My cloaking tab allows me to enable cloaking files ending with, and if I click this, I can see that I don't necessarily want to choose FLA, although I can use a PSD file. So if I delete that one, then only the files ending with FLA, and maybe I put AI in here for my Illustrator files. That way that I can't actually use those will be X'd out, and I won't be able to drag those into my design. Design notes. Design notes are a way, especially if I'm working with a remote group of people, a remote team, I can share notes that go along with particular files. I can attach them to files, so that way, let's say if I'm not done with my About page, I can add a design note to my About page that when they open it, that the note opens as well. I can maintain my design notes. I can clean up my design notes, because if I have a site that I'm now going to put up to a remote server, it's going to go live, I don't necessarily need all those design notes then. So Dreamweaver allows you to be able to clean those up, so they're not all on the server. My files view column. This is simply a way that I can move things around that I use the most. So I definitely want to see the name. I may have notes or I may not. Personally, I like being able to see my modified next. So if I then choose modified, I can move this up in my list, so then that is the next option next to my name. Size, types, etc., and I could always add a column from here as well. My Contribute tab. If I enable Contribute, then it enables me to set up for whatever end user is going to be using Contribute the parts of the page that they can update themselves. Remember, we also have in-context editing, so you have your choice of whether you want to choose Contribute or in-context editing to help them set up those files. Certainly that's not your only choice, but those are your choices within Dreamweaver itself. If I have any templates, don't want to rewrite relative document paths, and simply if I have Spry and I want to use Spry widgets, I can specify where those assets are stored, and looks like they're stored just fine for now. So now I'm just going to click on my Save button. It's going to cache my site. I see that in this particular dialog box, I see my name in there now, and now I can click Done. In my Files panel, you'll now see all of my folders, etc. So we can see this a little bit better. I'm going to have you click on a button over on the right-hand side in that particular panel. This little button right here underneath where it says Local View At is going to expand my Files view. When I click on it, on the PC, it will take over my whole entire page. On the Mac, it will just open up in its own window. Now I can see my Remote Files view and my Local Files view. Next, we'll make sure that we understand how to set up our folders, move folders around, and add our own files inside of Dreamweaver. So when I'm taking a look at my local files, I want to move some things around sometimes, and you might be tempted to do that outside of Dreamweaver. Again, the problem with doing that outside of Dreamweaver is that if I make my own files and if I change some things around, then Dreamweaver can't keep up. If I have things linked already, then you're going to break your links in your files, and you don't want that. So let's take a look at what we can do with our folder structure. Now you'll notice that my folder structure so far doesn't have anything that starts with a capital. So really, let's take a step back and make sure that we understand how to name things first, and then we can add our folder structure. I'm going to move my modified over just a little bit so I can see a little bit better the actual naming of my files. So when we're talking about our naming conventions, we want to make sure and not have anything that starts with a capital. We don't want any spaces because we don't want any special characters. It's going to go ahead and break. If I need something that has two names to it, my file, the first word is going to be lowercase, and I can either put a dash, an underscore, or just make sure that the next word has a capital on it so that I'm not putting any spaces inside of my naming conventions. So let's add a folder, and we'll put some of our files inside of our folder. At the very top, which is your site root, if I do a right click, I have got many options here. I can do a new file, I can do a new folder, I can open something from here, I can edit, copy, paste, delete, rename, I can select checked out files, recently modified, I can get files from my remote server, I can check out a file, I can put a file onto my remote server from here, check in. If I've set up version control, I can get my latest versions, show revisions. Here's my cloaking. I can enable it. I can cloak or uncloak something. I can preview in browser from here as well, which is also helpful. And I can add my design notes. But right now, we're just going to add a new folder. So I'm going to call this folder Pages. Now I've got several files out here in my remote structure, and because they're not all in the same sequence, I need to choose them in a different way than just holding down my Shift key. So first off, I'm going to choose my About page, then I'm going to hold down my Command key on the Mac or my Control key on the PC, and then I'm also going to choose Contact, Join, meetings, and photo walks, and I'm going to drag those inside of that Pages folder. Dreamweaver now lets me know that it's going to update those following pages. So instead of my links being just about or contact only, now I need pages in front of it. My index page is also going to update with those files being attached to my index page. I'm going to go ahead and click Update, and then Dreamweaver does all that work for me. So now all of those particular files are inside of my Pages folder. If I want to add a new file from here, let's say that I want to add a new map page so that they can see the locations. Well, let's just call it Locations. I'm going to go ahead and right-click where my Pages folder is, choose New File. The very first part of that will be chosen, and then we'll already have the .html. So don't feel the need to re-highlight the whole entire thing. At this point, we can just start typing. So we're going to call that Locations. And I can just hit my enter or return, and now that file is actually named, and it's in the right folder structure to go along with my pages. So now that we understand how to organize our pages, let's actually take a look at the page and look at the structure of the page itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click this button again to have it fold back up into my Files panel. Now that it's over here, let's open up just our DW environment.html. Once I open this up, let's just go into split view if it's not already, so that you can take a look at the page itself and the elements over on the left-hand side. So if we're taking a look at the structure itself, we notice that the very first thing that we see is a doc type. My doc type is very important. It makes sure that the browser is seeing the page correctly and producing what I have on my page correctly, as far as CSS, etc. Basically, that's what my XHTML is a part of, is making sure that it understands the CSS. Next, we'll take a look at line 2. Line 2 is the beginning tag for my HTML. I want to make sure and keep everything on my page inside of my HTML tags. If anything goes outside, it not only won't be shown, won't be a part of my HTML, but it could eventually end up adding weight to my page as well. Now, I only say that because once upon a time I had a client who we worked on the initial site, the look and feel of the site, then we handed off the site to the client. She added pages to her site, then she started adding text. After about 3 months, she said that she couldn't open a page. Next thing we know, we look at the page, it's 3 megs, and all of the text she had was underneath the end of her HTML tag, and she wasn't paying attention where she was adding text at all. She couldn't see it in the design view, so she didn't think it was a part of the page. So even if you're not that comfortable yet with looking at code, we want to make sure and look at the code eventually so we don't add any text, HTML, etc. other than what we want on the page itself. If you scroll down and look at the bottom of the page in the code view, you will see your end tag. The majority of the tags that we work with in HTML have a beginning and an end part of the tag. You'll see that the end part of my HTML is designated with a /. Let's scroll back up and take a look at the line 3 of my page, and that is my head tags. Now, my head tags are not visible when I take a look at my page. This is content that we would have, let's say, a keyword or a description, and we'll add that in just a few minutes. And other content like making sure that we have a style sheet applied to our page. If it's going to link and it's going to be an external style sheet, it will be inside of our head tags. Other things that we can have inside of our head tags might be if we want a fave icon, so a little icon to go along with our page, or maybe we want to say who the author is. All of that information goes inside of our head tags. Again, we will add some head information in just a minute. I see a title. Now, this is the second time that we have been able to see the title. I see it in the upper part of my window, title, untitled document. I see it here as well. And this is really just so that you can make sure and title that document. You do not want untitled document when you put your files up on top of your server and you take a look at your browser and you have no idea what site or whatever you're on just by looking at the page. This also helps search engines as well. So we, again, want to make sure that we title our page. The next element that we have, and I'll just scroll down a little bit, is our body tag. Everything that is actually visible inside of your browser for your website will be inside of your body tags. So I always want to make sure when I'm adding paragraphs, text, etc., if I'm doing it right inside of the code, I want to make sure that I'm adding it inside of that body tag itself. So you see that I have a paragraph at the top of my page. Everything that's inside of my paragraph is then designated by my P tag. Again, a beginning and a close tag. Same thing with my headers. I have a heading 1, a heading 2, a heading 3, and a heading 4, designated by H1, beginning and close tag. And I have an unordered list. So my unordered list is designated by a UL, and then the actual list items on the page as well. We'll be making those when we take a look at text.